Okay, so we just finished recording one of the best conversations about the law that we've heard or participated in out there so far. To set the stage, Sarah, do you remember back in the earlier Dear White Women days when we had our book club?
Yep, totally.
Okay, so I loved all the books we read there, obviously, because we got to pick them and the discussions that followed. And one of those books, which I then recommended to literally everyone I knew, lawyers and non-lawyers alike, was Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution.
Yes. I mean, I remember that book. And as the non-lawyer in a lot of these conversations, I was captivated not only by the content and the clarity with which it was communicated, by like just everything related to that book. And along those lines, I think that's why I really cannot express how excited I am that we have the author of that book and now of a wonderful new, totally must read book called Bad Law 10 Popular Laws That Are Ruining America on our podcast today. Keep listening to hear the least legal discussion that we'll ever have, where humor breaks up some of the truths that we're really quickly uncovering about our country, and for ways that we can all, every single one of us, play a role, big and small, in changing these bad laws. Welcome to What Do You Mean by That? A podcast by Sarah and me, Sasha. Would you please introduce yourself for our listeners?
Sure. My name is Elie Mystal. I am the justice correspondent for The Nation magazine. So, Cabot House, class of 2000, and Harvard Law School, class of '03. I really didn't like Yale. So I decided to stay. I'm a former associate at Debevoise and Plimpton for 2 glorious years, where when I quit, my the partner, the partner who OCI'd me and met me on campus and was really my mentor, he's a great guy. When I told him that I was quitting, he kind of puts down his notes and he's like, "Well, Elie, if you had come in and said, I desperately want to make partner, I would have been more surprised."
Oh, I mean, there's honesty there, I guess. So then I guess I'll lay the groundwork that I am the only non-lawyer or law-trained person on this call. And
Congratulations.
yet, thank you. I tease me, Sasha, sometimes about can we speak like human talk right now as opposed to lawyer talk? But we have come a long way in the, 6.5, almost 7 years that we've been doing this show. And I wanted to admit my law ignorance while launching into a brief overview of an incredible book that you wrote, Bad Law. I've been telling everyone about your book. You need to read this because the book Bad Law basically talks about 10 laws that you say are ruining America. And by the way you frame it has both of us agreeing with you, but instead of going through each one, because that'll take a while and people should read the book instead, can we discuss the premise of the book? Like, what do you mean by bad laws and why these laws in general?
Yeah, so what you're talking about, Sarah, is fundamentally scoping, right? There are lots of laws. Many of them are stupid. And so how do we kind of go from the full statutory framework into just a few for a book? And what I kind of hit upon was that there are laws that we have out there that are working as intended to cause great harm in our society, right? Moreover, there are laws that are working as intended that everybody agreed were good laws at the time that they passed. All right, so like the 10 popular laws in the deck of the book, it's actually really important to my scoping framework because I wanted to focus on things that at one time people were locked in arms. Democrats and Republicans were like, oh, this is what we should do. And we have since learned that these laws are causing significant damage, and yet they're still here. And yet they still exist, and yet they still do the harm that they were intended to do, even as, in many cases, Democratic Party, which at one point was a fan of all of these laws, were like, I don't know if that's working, but they don't repeal them. When Democrats get power, they don't repeal these laws. They don't come after these laws, right? And so when you think about like where we are politically in our nation, what we have is one party, the Republicans, who whenever they get power, they come in and use power maximally to smash things, to break things, to remake the world in the way that they see fit, right? When Democrats get into power, their fundamental premise is like, oh, all these things are broken. Let's piece it back together. Where's Jimmy? Where's my super glue? Like they start to put institutions back together and never go back and smash the bad things that have happened before. And so I wanted to write a book that really focused on, well, what could Democrats do specifically to kind of change some of these problems in this country that are already on the books right now, that we don't actually have to pass entire new legislations and have entire program. We can just get rid of these laws. And so the final scoping mechanism for the book was, what are the laws that can just be repealed, right? Because there are lots of laws that I disagree with, that maybe you guys disagree with, that need to be reformed, need to be changed, need to be massaged, need to be updated, right? And that's great. And that's a whole interesting conversation. I want to focus on laws that we could just white out. We could just cut out of the statutory code, and things, today, and things would be better tomorrow if we did that. So once you kind of put all those parameters in place, I was able to come up with, like 15, 20 laws, and then kind of whittled it down to like the ones that I had something to say about.
Well, I think that's so important because I think people, your framing is really important. And I want to say before I get into my question that Sarah never texts me about books that are related to law, like never, because she's just like, this is your area. Like, I'm not even going to try. But I got a text from her about bad law that was like, I was hooked from the first sentence. Literally never heard in our like 27 plus years of friendship about anything legal. So Elie, you did this for her. So you should feel super proud. And for all of you non-lawyers out there, like, you too could be Sarah here reading this book, first page, first sentence, like hooked in.
Before you go to your question, like, that's actually an important focus of not only my book, both of my books, my writing in general. I don't want to gate my writing behind a law degree, right? The law is complicated. I'm not going to lie and say that it's not complicated, but I believe that the law is something that normal people without a law degree can understand if you just explain it correctly, right? I think a lot of times lawyers like hide behind the jargon and hide behind our ridiculously expensive educations as if it's a way to show how smart and how educated we are, right? When actually, I never want to dumb things down. I never want to be reductive in my writing, but I want to explain it to people who do not have my education or training, because, and this is just a fundamental like belief system that I have, I believe that if people understood what the law was doing in the way that I understand what the law is doing, they would be as pissed off about the law as I am, right? And so like my goal is always, let me just show you what it is, and then you can decide for yourself if you think that's a good idea. Most people are going to end up agreeing with me that it's a bad idea once you understand what it's actually doing and how it's actually working.
I think that's such an important point. So I'm glad you brought that up too, because I do agree that some of the gatekeeping that lawyers do around language and explanation is really holding all of us back when it comes to, for example, these 10 laws that can be repealed. And, as I'm reading these 10 and like vehemently agreeing with you on all of this, I'm also like going through my head in 2025 and like, this law is increasingly more terrible now. This law is increasingly more terrible now. And I know you wrote this book before we are in like our current 2025, like, I don't know, dumpster fire, like whatever you want to call it. But can you talk a little bit about how like these laws actually got worse, or, how this trajectory is continuing?
Oh yeah. So I'll start with the kind of the first two laws that I talk about, the voting rights laws and the immigration laws. I think immigration, very obviously, we are seeing how the laws that I was just talking about in a kind of 2024 valence are just being metastasized to do great human rights violations in the 2025 context, right? And that's always been the case. That's one of the problems of not repealing bad laws when you have the chance, is that it allows these things to sit and fester, and it's just waiting for the right person, whether it's a Donald Trump or a Stephen Miller or a Jonathan Mitchell in Texas, to resurrect these ideas and put them towards more force and effect. Democrats have, I believe, a kind of foundational problem where they think non-enforcement of the law is the same as repealing it, right? Because they don't want to go through the political fight to actually get the law off the books. So they think just ignoring the law is the right way to go, forgetting, or perhaps not, more likely not caring, that the minute the administration changes over, the minute Democrats lose power, Republicans are going to come in and use these laws to the maximum effects, to the maximal effect of hurting people. So when you don't take away your racist immigration laws, and to be clear, our immigration laws are racist, they are based on literal Nazi eugenics theory. When you don't address that, when you have control of the White House and both houses of Congress, well, you give a layup to a person like Stephen Miller whenever he gets back into power, right? So that's on the immigration front. On the voting rights thing, it's even, I think, more existential because like Democrats don't seem to understand that Republicans already understand that Republicans cannot win if everybody votes. If everybody votes and everybody has their vote counted, Republicans know that they can't win. And so they do everything they can to suppress voting access and ability, predominantly for Black and brown people. When the Democrats get in charge, they stop the repression, but they don't actually do the things to make it easier and more likely for Black and brown people to vote. They stop the repression, but they don't actually encourage access and get rid of some of the repressive laws of our past. And then they wonder why they lose the next election, right? They show up in the Black community, once every 4 years or once every 2 years and be like, hey guys, having done none of the work to actually make voting easier. And then they wonder why they lose. I don't wonder why Democrats lose. I know why Democrats lose. And a lot of it is because voting rights are suppressed in this country. We have not yet had one fully free and fair election where everybody who is eligible to vote also has the ability to vote and the surety that all of their votes will be counted. That actually has not happened yet in American history. And part of the reason is because when Democrats have the opportunity to make it happen, they don't. And we are seeing, again, I always like to say we are living in a time of consequences, right? There were things that we could have done before to maybe prevent some of the things that are happening now, and we didn't do those things. So now we have to deal with the consequences of our previous failures and our previous inaction.
100%. I want to talk about the point that you're making too about history, right? Because I think a lot of people, maybe, the mouth breathers that you mention in your book, right, tend to discount any analysis of history when we talk about like the present day, right? Saying history doesn't matter. We need to think about, whitewashing history or making history more comfortable for people. But like discussions around things like the Second Amendment and our current, status of lack of gun control in America suggests otherwise. And I think on a personal note, as a mother of two boys who are in middle school, the oldest every year, the sixth grade goes to DC and they go to the Smithsonian museums. And I'm raising two Black boys in eighth grade and sixth grade, and the eighth grader went to the Museum of African American History and saw himself in like some great ways in there and had some hard discussions in other ways. And the sixth grader, when he goes, I think that may be a very different museum. We may be, he may not be able to see history in any of the Smithsonians, or as we're thinking about what comfortable history are we going to be teaching, which erases a lot of the true history. So, and I also say this as the granddaughter of a Civil War historian who like very strongly believed in the power of history and knowledge in terms of like how we got from point A to point B. So what do you say to people who discount history or the role that history plays in getting us to where we are like literally today?
Yeah, so I always try to start with this premise, and this is going to show my age, right? But like, I grew up and I was in middle school in the 1980s, right? I'm old, right? I'm in high school in the 1990s. Like this is not, I was not raised in a time of real racial and civil rights inclusion, right? I still was fundamentally raised in a time where my history was not in the history books, where the Smithsonian Museum of African American History did not exist for me to go on a field trip. So my Black parents, they never counted on the schools to teach me my own history, right? My father is Haitian American. He certainly never counted on the schools to teach me Haitian history, right? And said he wanted me to learn French, which I couldn't do. And there's a whole different, this is what I talk about on the couch, there's an issue there. But like the understanding was always in my house that There was going to be what you learned in school, and then there was going to be what you learned at home. And you had to use home as a way to deprogram your kids from what they were going to be learning in school because they weren't going to be getting the full story in school, no way, right? So like I put like this, I knew Thomas Jefferson was an asshole long before Lin-Manuel Miranda rapped about it, right? Like that that was not new information to me, right? But it's not information that you could have gotten from any school because no school, especially in the 80s and 90s, is like, hey guys, Thomas Jefferson, kind of an asshole, slaver, rapist asshole. Like, nobody's saying that, right? But coming home, I'm like, Daddy, I just read the Declaration of Independence. Like, let me tell you something about that, Tom, right? Like, that's how that conversation always happened in my house. And I think for a lot of us people my age, we thought we were living in a time where that conversation could happen at school, and that's just not the time. We were wrong. So once again, so it's more of like a return to where we always used to be, where a lot of this history has to be taught at home through the parents, through taking, if the museum no longer exists for your kid, all of the stuff in that museum is in a book somewhere, right? And you pull out the book and you take them through it that way. Like that's just always what we've had to do, and it's what we have to do again. So that's kind of like big think number one. We got to educate our own children because we cannot rely on the schools, on the state-run, government-run schools at this point to do that work. That's just the reality that we live in. The second point to why do people disregard or why do they want to whitewash history? I try to be a little bit empathetic here. The history of this country is disgusting. It's disgusting. The way that this country has treated Black people, gay people, women, it's absolutely disgusting. And I try to understand that for a lot of people in the majority, a lot of people who are not from vulnerable groups, reminding people of their own disgusting history is difficult. In the book, I point out, when my kids see pictures and see videos of what happened to Ruby Bridges, they see themselves as Ruby Bridges. And they say, oh my God, that's terrible. How could that happen? They have questions, right? When white kids look at pictures of Ruby Bridges, they're like, oh my God, that's grandma spitting on that child. Why'd you do that, grandma? And it's a tough conversation for grandma, I imagine, or at least it used to be, right? Like that's a hard thing to explain. Why, what was your family doing during the civil rights era? Oh, we were doing the lynching, right? We were doing the burning of the cross. Like, how do you have that? You don't want to have that conversation. And so that's part of the reason why they're trying to take it out of the schools, trying to take it out of the public sphere, because white folks don't want to confront their own disgusting history. And at some level, that's a white people problem, right? Like at some point, white people will have to confront their history or not. But like that has, at some level, almost like nothing to do with me and my kids. Like you guys can learn about this or not. There are many theories on how you teach white kids about what they ancestors did. Some theories about maybe you shouldn't. I tend to think that you're never gonna overcome history unless you learn how it happened. You're always going to repeat the mistakes of history unless you understand how those mistakes were made. But, as Chris Rock, one of his better observations, not even a joke, one of his better observations, right, was that racism is a white person problem. It's a white disease. And all we can do as non-racists is wait for white people to get over it, right? Physician, heal thyself. I can't force a white person to not be racist. I can't force a white person to confront their own history. Only white folks can do that. All I can do is try to survive it. And that's what I do in my family. That's what I try to teach my kids. I send my kids to one of the most progressive schools in the country. And I still have to do some deprogramming at home, right? That's just reality.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm having a number of thoughts around that. Like one thought, for example, was you talk about, doing your work with it for your family and looking inward and just the resilience required to be Black in America right now. How do you make peace? Can you make peace with the fact that white people get the option to prioritize their comfort over factual learning and facing the ugly truth of the history of this country? Because I feel like this idea of comfort in this country as a general whole is causing a lot of tension right? Like you even think about the
Yep.
trees in the biosphere, like they didn't thrive because there was no wind. Like humankind need some sort of tension, friction, anxiety. Like these are all normal things in order to grow. So there's a societal problem if we're prioritizing comfort over everything else. I can't imagine what that's like, being
Yep.
like that's going to be their problem. I'm just going to do this and wait for it to pass. Like how do you grapple with that was one thought I had.
Yeah,
Um,
so I don't make my peace with that. I don't
okay.
accept that. I am lucky enough. I put myself in a position to have, a fairly large platform, and I use it to disrupt people's comfort, especially white people's comfort, pretty much every day. Like that is like my way of handling that is to not be the person supporting the comfort. But Sarah, it is not just a question of what I do publicly, professionally, and online. Every single one of my white friends knows from all the people that I still am in contact with from Harvard or from Harvard Law School or from high school or whatever. Anybody who has my text number that we talk to, I'm gonna say what needs to be said. I don't give a damn how. Oh, we're just all trying to play Fortnite. Why are you bringing up politics? I'm gonna bring up politics. Like if like if that's what I think has to happen as our conversation has gone on. Like there's my friends like to say I have no chill when it comes to this stuff. I just don't. Like there's no like safe space for me. Like if you are going to be in shouting distance of me, you are going to hear what I have to say. If I'm in a Uber and the Uber driver is playing, Fox News radio, I'm like, turn that crap off, please. And I will sit here and have a fight with you about it. And maybe you're going to kick me out of your car, but like, we're going to do this now. I just don't have that, like, because as you say, like, one of the things that white folks want is to be comfortable. I don't get to be comfortable. Nobody else around me does either. That's just kind of how I roll. Again, one of my friends from college, one of my best friends from college, who's a poor white guy from Maine. Like just I'm literally I am a middle class black man from a cosmopolitan area. This is a rural white guy from Maine, and we've been friends for over 20 years now. And he likes to say that I have the largest capacity to be hated of anybody he's because I will just go there. Like I will just dive in, lean in, I guess is what the kids say now, right? Like I lean into it, I talk about it, I bring it up. If I hear something untoward, if I'm playing a video game and and some depiction in the video game feels off or wrong to me, it's not like, oh, I'm not going to play this game, but I'm going to talk about the off depiction or the thing that shouldn't be happening or whatever, like while we're just trying to sit there and shoot aliens. I'm going to bring it up.
I think
Yeah.
that's amazing. And I think that requires introspection, clarity on what you stand for, of your values, where your boundaries are. And I feel like that's the kind of work that I want more people to be doing because then you can have conversations, an informed conversation. Your book is very clear about what your stance is. There is no like, I might entertain this right-wing idea. Like, no, you're very clear on what you stand for. And I think as people get more clear on that, and for example, want to play a part in maybe getting some of these laws repealed or doing something, what can the non-lawyer do? What is someone who's not a legislator, has no influence in that realm do? I mean, obviously, there's voting. We all talk about voting all the time.
Yeah.
Is that the one and only thing? Is there anything else we can do?
I hate telling people vote harder. Just go and vote hard. Is like slam that ballot. Yeah, like that's. I think the analogy I made is like voting is a threshold issue. It is not the end of the conversation. It is the least you can do, not the most you can do. So two big things. One, never underestimate how important it is to be informed. Just straight up be informed about this stuff, right? Like I have made my career to be informed about this stuff. And most people can't because they have actual real jobs, right? My wife, she gets half her news from the Captivate screen in the elevator, right? Because that's sort of like on a on her lunch break, right? Like she's got a real job. She can't be reading CNN and MSNBC 24/7, right? So like it's difficult for her to stay informed about everything that's going on. And that's why I'm like, well, honey, read me. I got you, right? Like, so like actually just being informed about these things then arms you with not only like the media literacy to know that if you're actually informed, then when you're being lied to, and that's extremely helpful, but then it also allows you to be the fount of information for somebody else, right? And, each one teach one, right? So like I tell my wife something, my wife then in the elevator sees something on the Captivate. She's like, that's not wrong. The person sitting next to her in the elevator is like, oh, I thought that was right. No, it's and you snowballs that way. So I always like to tell people, like, especially white folks, like who agree with me, try to be me in the rooms where I'm not invited, right? Because there are only so many rooms I'm allowed into. There are only so many people that I can reach. And quite frankly, most other white folks aren't going to hear it from me anyway. They're just not like they'll see me and my face and and the hair, and they'll just be like, I don't want to, right? But they'll listen to you. You're their friend. You're their spouse. You're their person that they'll actually listen to way more than me. So if you agree with me, be me in those spaces where I'm not allowed to be in, and that all reduces back down to information to actually know what's going on, so that you can, I'm working with a personal trainer right now because I really need to outlive Trump. Like that needs to happen. I need to get through this. So I'm, like working out or whatever. And I'll tell my trainer stuff, right? And my trainer then will go tell his other clients stuff that they wouldn't have known if not for him through me. So like being informed, just 100% a key, right? Now, being informed is a huge task. And if that's all you can do, thank you, right? Like that's a good start. If you got a little more in you, activate, right? And by activate, I don't just mean like go out to the protest on the bridge and with the signs and whatever. Like it's great if you can. That's not for everybody. Me personally, I'm not a big protester actually. Like I don't like walking. That's not my favorite activity. Right? I don't love crowds, right? And just like being in the cauldron of, I've been to protests. I don't love it. I don't feel like it's my highest, best use, right? So I'm not a protester. I do other things, right? I call my representatives. I call my congressman. Kristen Gillibrand's, constituent service person. She knows my name, and not because I write for a living, right? Because I make those calls. I put in that kind. That's an effort that I can do pretty easily to me, right? I support the causes that I support with money. I am lucky and blessed to have a bit of privilege to be able to have some disposable income that I can spread around, and I spread it around to causes that I care about. And I like to. There's one specific one I like to tell people because it's not expected, but you'll see when I say it. So, the thing that I contribute, like the first thing that I contribute to every year, is the ASPCA. I like dogs. I like I like pets. I think they should be protected and loved and cared for, right? I'm not a vet, right? I'm not a park ranger. I don't know. I don't even like cats all that much, right? I have absolutely no professional insight into that world. But I know that the ASPCA does good work, and I want that work to continue. So I put in my $20, I put in my $50 every year to make sure that I'm doing what I can to see that organization funded. Right? Y'all could do that with NPR. Y'all could do that with any number, the ACLU. Y'all could do that with any number of organizations that are out there doing real important work that, oh, by the way, their funding is being cut and taken away at the federal level every day at this point, and the Supreme Court is going to allow that to continue. Your dollars and cents are more worth it now than ever before, and you don't have to know a lot about, the larger, issues at play to be like, okay, I've identified this organization. It does good work. It does work that I support. Boom, here's the money. Like that's actually a thing that privileged people can do quite easily. And if you think about it, privileged people do that all the time, right? How many times do we just throw money at a problem, right? How many times do we just like, I don't know, I bought this person a gift card for their birthday because I could not be bothered to actually care enough about this person to figure out what they want for Christmas, right? So just here, gift card, right? We throw money at the problem all the time. Throw money at these problems. That can also help, right? Throw a call in, sign a petition, like do all of these seemingly, there is not one silver bullet. I wrote in The Nation recently that we tend to fetishize big resistance TM, right? Well, I've marched with King and I went to and that's great. Again, that's awesome if you can do that. But at this point in history, any small act has the ability to throw a wrench into the system, to gum up the works. These small individual acts of resistance at some level are all we can do right now. Maybe all you can do right now when you see ICE taking somebody away is to pull out your camera, pull out your phone and tape it. Put that on YouTube. Maybe that's all you can do. Because I mean, unless you know karate, you're not fighting ICE, right? You're not Chuck Norris. You're not going to stop the abduction. But if you can document and record it, that could be enough, right? There was in Rochester, New York, a couple of weeks ago, ICE got pulled back because 1,000 people showed out to shout at them. They were shouting shame, and ICE pulled back because they did not come with enough force to deal with 1,000 angry people. And I kept talking about that story because it was only 1,000, right? You get more than that at a single A baseball game. You get more than that at a high school football, at a JV high school football game, right? That's only 1,000 people push back ICE for at least that moment, right? Maybe they saved one guy. That was enough. That's got to be enough for us right now. And so at this point, anything you can do is something that you should be doing, right? The last thing I'll say about this, Sarah, is like, I wrote, whatever you're doing right now is what you would have been doing during any great catastrophe in history, right? Oh, I never would have spit on Ruby Bridges, really? Because what you're doing right now is what you would have done then. It's what you would have done in 1938 in Germany or Poland. It's what you would have done during Jim Crow. It's what you would have done during slavery. What you're doing right now is what you would have done then. So do something so that you are not ashamed of yourself, so that your kids and your grandkids are not ashamed of you, because they will ask. They will ask when this is over, when we are through this. I don't know how, I don't know when, but at some point, our kids and our grandkids are going to ask, Grandpa, what did you do? What did you do when the bad orange man came? And my answer cannot be nothing.
I almost want to leave it right there because that's such a powerful thing. Like, I was like, well, we're done here. Well, this is going to take us on a slight tangent because with anything, this is a question I have. Well, it's not a question, but it's more of a discussion that I've been dying to have with you because I want to talk about the Supreme Court for a second. And my favorite meme right now is this one that says, I've had burritos more supreme than this court. And I just I cannot get enough of that because I think it's really true. And it's also, this is the Supreme Court that we know who they are, so this is not a surprise, right? What is happening. But I think for your average American, stuff like shadow dockets or stuff like what, every time I get a Wall Street Journal or CNN News alert where it's like, Trump asked the Supreme Court to basically fire people for him, it is the Supreme Court in a way that we have not seen it before, or maybe have not been paying attention to it before as your average American. So can you talk a little bit about what we are in right now with this?
The simplest way of putting it is that the third branch of government has always been as powerful as the other two, right? So we talk about branches of government in terms of Article 1 of the Constitution is the first branch of government, that's Congress. Article 2 is the second branch, it's the executive. Article 3 is the third branch, it's the courts. We've been told that they operate in checks and balances. Everybody learns that in high school or in middle school, if you go to a good school. But we've been taught that the Supreme Court is apolitical, that the Supreme Court exists outside of the political rough and tumble of the Congress and the executive. And that has always been a lie. The Supreme Court has always been extremely political. It is just as political as the other two branches of government. The difference is that we don't get to elect them. The difference is that they serve for life. The difference is that once these people get on the court, nothing can be done to stop them or stop their political ideals. That's problem number one. Problem number two, the Supreme Court, and only the Supreme Court, claims veto power over the other two branches of government. People are just, again, we were taught checks and balances, but actually, no, it's not a check and a balance. It is a veto over the other two. Because if the Congress passes something and the president signs something and the Supreme Court says, that's not part of the Constitution, they can just veto that. And the only way to get around a Supreme Court veto is not by a two-thirds majority of vote. No, 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 no. The only way to get around a Supreme Court veto is to change the literal Constitution. And then you got to change it in such a way that the Supreme Court then says, okay, we can't veto that. But the Supreme Court can make up what they want to veto whenever. And so and this is from my first book, but one of the examples that I use to show this immense, ridiculous veto power that the Supreme Court has is the first set of civil rights cases called the slaughterhouse cases that came up after and in response to the 13th Amendment, right? That's a simple one, right? No slavery unless you're incarcerated, but no slavery except for all the black people that we put in jail, right? Simple, right? And so the first set of cases after the 13th Amendment were brought by white folks. White folks, not black people, white folks who were working, it's called the slaughterhouse cases. They were working in, spoiler alert, slaughterhouses in Louisiana. And because of the rent tenement situation, I don't want to get into it, the white folks working for, the white workers in the slaughterhouses said that they were functionally economically enslaved by the rich white owners who own the slaughterhouses. Interesting case to me. The Supreme Court says, actually, no, the 13th Amendment only applies to black folks. It only applies to black folks and it doesn't apply to economics, so go away. Your lawsuit fails. That doesn't say that. I've read the 13th Amendment. There's nothing in the 13th Amendment that says that only black people cannot be in. No, it says no slavery. But that's an example of its veto power. Even after they changed the Constitution, the Supreme Court still said, yeah, but what you really meant was. And again, that's an obvious example, but like they do it all the time across all sorts of issues. We can talk about the First Amendment. We can certainly talk about the Second Amendment, where the Supreme Court has just made up something in the Second Amendment. Literally, the Supreme Court has made up the idea that you have a right to own guns for self-defense. That's not in the Constitution. And they've ignored the idea that you can own guns because you're part of a well-regulated militia. So they've put one thing into the Second Amendment that wasn't there and taken one thing that's in the Second Amendment straight out. The point is that the Supreme Court has an incredible amount of power, and they have always used it politically. So when you then don't fight for who gets on the court, when you act like the people who get on the court are just apolitical, detached heads in boxes who just all they do is think and they have then you've lost the whole game. And Republicans have understood that the Supreme Court is the most important political institution in this country for at least 30 or 40 years. Republicans have understood that for my entire life. And Democrats are still just now thinking about, maybe the Supreme Court is a political branch. I don't know, Jim. We need to have a blue ribbon commission to study that. I'm not sure. Like, are you kidding me? And this is why the Supreme Court is now doing what it's doing, because it is a political branch that has been staffed with 6 Republicans. 6 Republicans who want the Republican political agenda to succeed and are doing everything they can to make it succeed in the face of 3 liberals who want the Republican political agenda to fail and are doing everything they can to make it fail, and they're just getting outvoted 6-3 in a political branch of government. If people understand the Supreme Court is political, then I think that makes people able to understand everything that liberals need to do to control this third and most powerful political branch of government.
And you mentioned it in your first book, but just for those who haven't read it yet, what are the things that can be done to change the composition of the Supreme Court, the term limits? Can we just talk about that? Because there is hope for change, maybe.
Yeah, so the way to fix the Supreme Court is court packing. It's court expansion. I don't care. I know the focus testing, court packing is not the right way. It's court packing. I don't care what you call it. Like, that's how you fix it. There are more Republicans on the Supreme Court now than Democrats. If you want to change the political outcomes of the Supreme Court, you need to put more Democrats on the Republicans. The way to do that is court packing, the end. Term limits don't really work. And I know people love to think the term limits are going to work because it sounds fair. Nobody should serve forever. I actually totally agree with that. Like, I think there should be term limits just cause, right? But in terms of changing the political nature of the court, it doesn't actually work. You're talking about everybody having an 18-year term limit. So, by the way, 18 years is already an extremely long time to hold power, right? The most a senator can hold power without being reelected is 6 years. So you were literally tripling that amount of time for a Supreme Court justice. And all of these term limit plans don't actually restore any balance of power. It just makes who's randomly in charge at the point when those 18 years flip over, just gives them the power to replace justices as they please. Doesn't make those justices more fair or less political in any way. There's a huge constitutional problem with the fact that one of the only things that the Constitution says about the Supreme Court is that justices cannot be removed. So how do you do term limits unless you're also going to amend the Constitution to allow term limits to happen? There are lots of people who say like, oh, well, you can make it work this way or that way or whatever. But remember, the Supreme Court gets to tell us what the Constitution says. So if you're going to argue that term limits are somehow already constitutional, you're not going to convince me. You got to convince John Roberts. The three justices on the Supreme Court right now who have served longer than 18 years, and that's when we're saying term limits should start, right? 18 years, are John Roberts, Sam Alito, and Clarence Thomas. So you got to convince them that the Constitution allows for term limits, and then you got to convince them to leave because you said so. How do you think that's going to work out for you? Right? So term limits just don't actually, I know they're popular and I know why they're popular, but they don't actually fix your problem. Court packing fixes the problem. And the courts have changed the number of justices many times throughout history. Not everybody knows, again, information is king, information is key. A lot of people don't know this. The Supreme Court started with 6 justices, right? By the way, whoever ever came up with the idea that there should be any panel or any commission that has an even number of people is stupid and should be punted into the sun. That never works ever in history. Like, no. So he had 6, right? Then when Thomas Jefferson came up, he wanted to expand it to put it back to 6 because John Adams had put it down to 5. Because John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were in different political parties. Adams wanted to take away power from Jefferson, so there was an open Supreme Court seat. Adams was like, actually, we only need 5 justices, so Jefferson couldn't appoint a new justice. Jefferson was like, ha ha ha, I'm the president now. He re-expanded it to 6. Then, on his way out the door, Jefferson expanded the Supreme Court to 7 because he just wanted to put an extra justice on the court to, again, retrench his party's power. So he did that. We were at 7 for a while. We were at 7 until Andrew Jackson came along, and he wanted to get rid of the federal bank, the national bank. And he didn't have enough votes on the Supreme Court. So Jackson was like, how about we have some more people on the Supreme Court? And he expanded it to 9. The first time we were at 9 was Andrew Jackson putting 2 justices on to get rid of the national bank, right? So then you were at 9 for a while, and then Lincoln comes along, and Roger Taney's like, the black man has no rights that the white man must respect. And Lincoln was like, all right, whatever. And then Taney was like, actually, the president does not have the power to wage war against the South. And Lincoln was like, why don't you shut the hell up? And he put a 10th justice on the Supreme Court to take power away from Taney. So we were at 10 justices during the entire Civil War. And then Andrew Johnson comes in and everybody hates Andrew Johnson. So then we go back down to 7 because everybody hates Andrew Johnson. And then we finally get to the Judiciary Act of 1869, which set the number at 9. And we've been at 9 since 1869 because of an act of Congress. We can change that number with a different act of Congress. We can have the Judiciary Act of 2020 and 28 that says we put the number at 10 or 20 or 30. I argue for a 29-person Supreme Court. I think we should add 20 justices. People are like, that's too many. Really? Is it? We're going to what? We're going to run out of chairs? Is that what we think? The largest court of appeals, like the level of court right below the Supreme Court, you know how many judges it has on? The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has 29 judges on it. It works fine. 29 is great. I like 29 for a couple of reasons. One, it allows us to see cases in panels. All the circuit courts, and Mashasa knows this, all the circuit courts, they don't hear cases as a full court. They hear cases as a 3-judge panel. And that's great because that means you don't know who's going to hear your case before you bring it. That's huge. That makes your case have to fit in a kind of center mass because you don't know if you're going to get the three judges that agree with you or three judges that hate you. So you have to have a really center mass kind of case. So three judge panels, not being able to know your own judge before you bring the case, I think that's a huge benefit. The other thing about 29 is that it gives me something to trade, right? Because the Republicans will be like, no, you can't pack the court. And I'm going to be like, all right, here's the deal. If you agree that we're going to expand the number of Supreme Court justices, we'll share. We'll have 11 Democratic justices and 9 Republican justices. It's got to be 11 and 9 because I'm never, ever going to forget that crap y'all pulled with Merrick Garland. So you got to readjust for that. But if you think about it right now, 11-9, that still gives Republicans a majority on the Supreme Court. 11-9 addition still gives Republicans a 15-14 majority on the Supreme Court. And I'm okay with that because the other thing that 29 justices does is that it makes all of the decisions more medium, more moderate, because getting 15 people to agree on anything is really hard. I made this analogy before, but like, if you imagine trying to figure out, is it you and your boys, you and your girlfriends, for you, late at night, you're going to go somewhere. You might go to some places, right? You might go to some places that you ain't supposed to be, right? Y'all might go to Thunder Down Under. Who knows, right? Girls' night out. Woohoo, right? You got to make plans to get 15 people to the same place at dinner time. You're going to go to Applebee's, right? You're going to go to you're going to go to some kind of center mass, good for everybody, endless bread bowl place, right? Because you can't get 15 people to agree on anything. We already see with the Republicans only having 6 of them, they can't actually always agree on exactly how they want to destroy the country. They agree that it should be destroyed, but how and the intricacies, and as I said earlier, the law is complicated, man. So you give me 29 justices and you're going to tell me that you're consistently going to get 15, 14 decisions. I just don't buy it. That's not how humans think. That's not how humans work. And so even having just more, it's like my favorite not real character is still Kermit the Frog, right? And in Muppet Steak Manhattan, Kermit the Frog says, you know what we need in the show? We need more dogs and cats and bears and chickens and things, right? So just give me more dogs and cats and bears and chickens and things, and the decisions from the Supreme Court will get better, right? So yeah, so just to finish the point, 11-9, I got something to trade with the Republicans. So either we agree that we're going to expand the court in this way, or because I am a Democratic president with the power and Democrats control the House and the Congress, which is the House and the Senate, which is all you need to pass this bill, or Mitch McConnell or John Thune, I'm just going to put 20 of the most fire-breathing Democrats I can find on the court, and y'all can lose 23-6 until y'all can expand the court back. Good luck. But it's going to be really hard for you to cheat on elections when I got 23 Democrats sitting at the Supreme Court. Best of luck to you, right? And the 20 Democrats I'm going to choose now, if we're not going to play ball, Mitch, I'm going to put people like, I don't know, Elie Mystal on the Supreme Court. Screw it, right? Do you want that, Mitch, or do you want to play ball and share in this bounty that we're about to do? Like, that's the play. And so that's why I think 20 plus 20 is great. And if Republicans come back and expand again, how is it worse? Again, right now, it's a 6-3 court. You're going to lose every case of import for a generation right now. If Democrats expand the court and the Republicans expand it right back later, what have you lost? It's 6-3 now. I put 20 on, it's 23-6. Republicans get back in power. They put 20 on, it's 26-23. Again, what have you lost? Nothing. You were at worst in exactly the same place that you are. And then the final argument is just like, well, if you do that, it'll destroy the apolitical nature of the Supreme Court. Guess what, bro? That's already been destroyed. That pot got broke 20 years ago. So if we are in a situation where whatever party in power has to come into power with its own slate of Supreme Court justices, guess what, folks? That sounds like democracy to me. That sounds like, once again, elections matter to me. That sounds like, once again, we don't have unelected officials telling us what we are allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. So either way you scrape it, it works out better for me than what we have right now.
I am no lawyer, but I cannot argue with that. I mean,
I'm here for it. I co-sign that. Yep.
I really appreciate
Democrats
the time.
don't. Biden doesn't. You know, court packing is, and people are, when I started talking about court expansion, that stuff was polling at like 15%. Sorry, when I started talking about it, it wasn't polling at all. Like, you couldn't get a poll about it because it was so like, oh my God, what is he talking about? Now we're like in the high 30s. It's an emerging idea, and we're in the high 30s without actually any leadership on it, right? Without any candidate making it the focus of their campaign, without any leader saying, this is how we fix things. This is how we fix things.
I love it. Well, hey, I still vividly remember when we met, right? It was our 25th Harvard reunion. I was in the basement of, it used to be Loker Commons. What was it? Like the student center, which is where Misasha and I met for the very first
Oh, wow.
time in the basement there for the Half Asian People's Association. And your interest was piqued because I had mentioned the title of our old podcast, Dear White Women, right?
Mhm.
Tell us a little about your interest. If you could leave our audience with one or two key takeaways, or if you could say whatever you wanted to the audience of a show that was called Dear White Women, what would it be?
I mean, I've actually literally already said it, Sarah. It is be me in the rooms where I'm not invited. I can't emphasize enough how difficult it is for the information that I try to put out every day to actually seep into the networks where it needs to seep into. And it's because I am not the messenger. I am not the best messenger for my own message, right? I understand. I don't like that, but I understand that. I understand what racism looks like in this country. I understand the limitation. Not everybody likes to get screamed at. I like to scream at people. Not everybody likes that. That's not how everybody kind of accesses their information. I get that, like I can't help being who I am, but I understand that it's not for everybody. But people like the people in your audience, they do have access to networks that I don't have access to. They are able to put things in such a way with the right charm. My editor calls them feminine qualifiers, right? Like that, when you're handling a man, where you're just like what you have to say. And my wife does this to me all the time, right? Like, how you have to put things in a way to make the idiot man be like, I'm glad we had that idea, honey. That was awesome, right? Like when it's not like, but you know how to handle people, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't do that. Your audience are some of the people who can do that, right? In all of their networks, and not just their professional networks, but their personal networks, their social networks, their school networks. Oh my God, like, the importance of communicating some of these messages to your children, right? Who women are most likely sexistly forced to spend more time raising than many men, right? Not me. I was at back school night last night. I should, So in communicating those messages to your children, making sure I was in one of the recent pieces I wrote, you look at all the anti-trans stuff that's happening, all the anti-LGBT stuff. You, the parent, especially you, the mother, you've got the power to make sure that the trans kid gets invited to the birthday party, right? And it can be as simple as that. You get the power to make sure that the LGBTQ kid is also invited to Rock and Jump and also gets to play in all the reindeer games, right? And also feels included and part of the class and part of the community. Make sure you do that, right? Like all of these, again, small scale individual acts of resistance. This is what you can do right now. And this is what I can't do, right? This is what these are the changes that I cannot make. Because, there's a bouncer at the door. This is like, brother, you're not coming in here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for spending this time with us. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
You've been listening to What Do You Mean by That? A show dedicated to being better humans and getting loud for all of us. Hat tip to Sarah's daughter for the logo, and huge thanks to Misasha's son for our incredible theme music. Find out more and subscribe to our newsletter at whatdoyoumeanbythat.com. Because as always, it's all of us or it's none of us.